Okay, so I'm going to be responding to this. This is Big Joel. He is sort of a lefty. Judging from what I've read about him, he's like a pseudo. I don't know if he's a commie or an anarchist, and he seems to review children's movies for the most part. Very strange, very reclusive, almost creepy, actually. But he has an interesting take on Stefan Molyneux. Yeah, you'll notice I have I have a certain plugin installed that is not liking Stefan Molyneux's name up here. I apologize for that. But I'm going to skip 2 minutes of this video because it's an analogy that's just really stupid. If you want to listen to his analogy on cultural mystification, go look at the actual video. I'll put it in the description, whatever. But I'm not going to waste any time on that because I'm going to waste enough time yelling at him. So let's just start this and see what his take on Elliot Rod. This is him responding to Stefan Molyneux. Yeah.
Is what I think of.
Yeah. Cultural mystification. Yeah. Oh God, trigger warning. Oh,
Elliot
God.
Rodger was a murderer. On May 23rd, 2014, he killed 6 people near the University of California, Santa Barbara, as well as himself. And when I look at his crimes, what I see is a story about terrible belief.
I'm assuming that everyone who watches this has seen this guy's videos, but I just want to say, for anyone that's not familiar with him, his eyes do that a lot. See when they dart up, they dart to one side for some reason. I don't know what condition this guy has. He's got something. There's something wrong with him. That or he's a tweaker. I don't know which. He never combs his hair either. Comb your hair, Joel. Comb your hair. Make your bed. I'm Jordan Peterson today. Clean your room, bucko.
Taken to an awful conclusion. Elliot Rodger wrote a manifesto called My Twisted World.
Let's go
about
back.
terrible beliefs taken to an awful conclusion.
Yeah, you want to remember that phrase. Terrible beliefs taken to an awful conclusion. That's his thesis. He'll deny this. He denied it to me when I tried to question him in the comment section. I'm not going to get into that, but he doesn't stand by that. He doesn't say that his ideology was the cause of this. He denies that now. I don't know why, but that's what he said.
Elliot Rodger wrote a manifesto called My Twisted World, made a series of YouTube videos where he put forth extremely misogynistic views. To him, women were subhuman, incapable of choosing mates properly, deserving of extreme violence because they didn't want to have sex with him.
I'd like to say that is the subhuman factor. I don't think is really applicable. How can one sex not be human if the other one is? How does that make sense? Like from a biological standpoint, you know what I mean? Like that doesn't. I don't even know what it said there. Brutal the world is. Flock these men. It doesn't say anything about being subhuman. You just made that up, and it doesn't make sense. That's a racial term that you're using, a racial straw man actually. That doesn't make sense in this context.
Subhuman, incapable of choosing mates properly, deserving of extreme violence because they didn't want to have sex with him. He was also a white supremacist. He hated black people and saw himself as superior because he was half white, descended from British aristocracy.
Now, his position on race, his thing about race is totally personal. He's entitled. The thing about Elliot Rodger is that he was a victim with an intense entitlement complex. So he simultaneously had a huge victim complex as well as entitlement. So he felt like he was entitled to sex. He was entitled to women. He made efforts to be attractive to women, and he also hated them largely because he couldn't have them. You'll see the pattern here. But Joel reduces that down to white supremacy and misogyny. It's very reductionist.
He was also obsessed with class and money. To him, it was his breeding and his material possessions that set him apart from these less deserving men. He was the supreme gentleman with a nice car and expensive sunglasses. Punctuating all of these...
That's because if you listen to any of these pickup artists, these charlatans, they'll tell you that these are the things that make you attractive. You know, you get the odd one. Roosh V, I used to dislike him. I don't remember why now, but he talks about having game. And you have people like Patrice O'Neill. Patrice O'Neill was a great resource if you want to know about women. Just from like a personal, there is a degree of wisdom when it comes to socialization, and particularly about women, that you can't really get other than through experience of your own or vicarious experience. You can't really like explain it in the autistic way that a lot of leftists would like. But yeah, and this is why this is something Elliot Rodger didn't understand either. And it's why he hated women, because he didn't understand. He thought because he was a decent looking guy, he tried working out, he tried having the status, he tried having the car, he had a BMW, that these things should make him attractive. And that led to a lot of frustration.
Elements, though, is a sharp sense of Elliot Rodger's feelings of inadequacy. Mm-hmm. Sure, he thought girls were the worst, but he didn't know why they weren't interested in him. Right. Sure, he was half white, but he was half Asian too. Sure, he had some nice stuff, but he needed more. He was obsessed with winning the lottery. And to me, this is most of what Elliot Rodger is. A man with a complicated and awful ideological perspective who committed a crime that aligned with that perspective. And looking at him...
You see? Oh, it aligned with it. It's not causal. It just aligned. It just happened to be. Because you don't want to get called out on saying that was the reason, that it was white supremacy and misogyny that caused him to do this. You don't want to get called out on that, so you just say it just happened to align with it. It's a very sleazy play with words, with semantics. But yeah, no, that's not really relevant, and you'll see why.
What I'd want to ask is, what does he tell us? His writings, his beliefs, his actions, his politics. What do they say? On May 26, 2013, only 3 days after the massacre, Stefan Molyneux made a video called The Truth About Elliot Rodger. And right off the bat, he has a real bone to pick with those kinds of questions. In the first moments of his video, he tells us, there are all sorts of people out there who are going to try to read into Elliot Rodger to make this about some big political issue,
as people always do when there's a tragedy like this, whether it's gun control or whatever. Yeah, people like to use these things to push their agendas. That is true.
Feminism or whatever. And this act, to Stefan, is disrespectful and opportunistic.
A lot of people...
Yeah, generally decent people would say that. However, yeah, you trying to use a tragedy to push your own political agenda, which wouldn't change no matter what the tragedy is disingenuous, and it is sleazy.
Tragically attempt to climb over the bodies of the victims of these kinds of shooters and unfurl whatever particular political or socioeconomic flag they wish to unfurl, which I consider highly disrespectful to the victims. They're not tools to be used in a political agenda, whether it's feminism, anti-misogyny, or gun rights, or you name it.
So instead of doing that, he wants to approach this tragedy specifically. Look at the nitty-gritty of Elliot Rodger's life, look at the events he describes in his manifesto, and come to various evidenced conclusions on why and how these murders happened.
These victims deserve as much understanding and analysis, rational analysis, that we can bring to the problem in the hopes of preventing recurrence.
So, on first blush, it kind of feels like Stefan Molyneux's agenda is just a lot better than mine is. I mean, look,
That is true. And I wonder, what is your agenda, Joel? You never really explained that. What is your agenda here? What are you trying to do? You'll see.
The most important thing about Elliot Rodger is not that he was a misogynist or a white supremacist or anything like that. It's that he murdered people. If he didn't do that, I wouldn't even know who the guy was.
Then why is it that you talk about misogyny and white supremacy so much and so little about the fact that he murdered the kid? You know what I mean?
So it only stands to reason that our best, our only way of looking at this person should work to explain his crime. That is how we can learn from this awful tragedy and prevent such things from happening in the future. Big Joel's loosey-goosey political...
You're not concerned with preventing these things in the future, and I'm saying that right now. You make no attempts to posit ideas for how we can stop this at any point in this video.
Power hour be damned. Well, I don't agree with that. I don't think Stefan Molyneux's paradigm works, and to show you why, I want to talk about his video. So, broadly speaking, the truth about Elliot Rodger is a story about collecting straws. And I mean that kinda literally. Stefan says that phrase just so many times.
I'm not blaming video games. Hundreds of millions of video game players around the world, they don't become shooters. But again, we're looking at the straws on the camel's back. It's all over the LA scene.
Okay, yeah. So he's going to go back to these things. I'm going to stop this video periodically to read out some of these things because Stefan doesn't read them in this video. I haven't watched the original video. I'm not going to go back and watch it. This is from a time when Stefan was in a weird place. I think this was from his defooing days. It might even be. I have my problems with Stefan Molyneux. I really do. But in this case, he's far more on the nose than Big Joel is, and I'm going to explain why.
That beautiful women go there to milk money and status out of their beauty. So again, this is part of the culture that he lived in. Again, I'm not saying it's causal, but it is another one of the straws on the camel's back. Now, I'm not even remotely, of course, trying to suggest that divorce causes mass murder, because there are hundreds of millions of children of divorce around the world, and very few of them will ever become mass murderers. But we're looking at the number of straws on the camel's back.
Most of the video is spent going through Elliot Rodger's manifesto and finding various things in his life that probably, at least according to Steph, contributed to his murdering people. Not claiming that any one of these were the proximate cause of the murders, but that all of them contributed in some way.
Let's go back for a minute.
Hundreds of millions.
Let's go back a little bit and read some of these. I just wanted you guys to be able to hear what was going on here. I think this is the first one. At 6 years old, Elliot Rodger discovered video games, which would later grow into an all-consuming obsession as he had tried to escape from his life. Now, I'm not going to say that I don't think it's video games. I think in this case it was the fact that he was trying to escape from his life. Why was he trying to escape from his life? What kind of behavior is that? Is that a social behavior, or is that antisocial? I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it? It's a maladaptive behavior, isn't it? I mean, if you can't admit that that's maladaptive, there's something wrong with you. At 12 years old, Rodger discovered World of Warcraft. So, an all-consuming obsession which doesn't involve social interaction. I think that is important, actually. I think that is key.
But again, we're looking at the straws on the camel's back. It's all over the...
Rodger also had a very high financial demand expectations for his family. Yeah, so he wanted, I won't read all of this, but essentially he wanted them to give him money constantly. He was obsessed with money. We know this. We've already been through this. We can kind of skip this.
The LA scene. That beautiful women go there to milk money and status out of their beauty. So again, this is part of the culture that he lived in. Again, I'm not saying it's causal, but it is another one of the straws on the camel's back. Now, I'm not...
Now, this is, I think this is the one. Yeah, this is important here. I'm going to read this out. Excuse me. Starting at 6 years old, I had to witness my mother and father get into a lot of arguments. At some point, I learned about the possibility that parents can separate, divorce, no longer live together. The prospect baffled my little mind. I once sat down with my mother on our outside deck and asked her if she and my father would ever get divorced. She told me it will never happen, and that I had nothing to worry about. I was relieved by that. Little did I know such a thing would happen in only a few months' time. So he remembers finding out about this. He remembers being traumatized. I would assume being traumatized. It was important enough to mention that this baffled me, and he was concerned about it. So he asked his mother. She says, no, it's never going to happen. And then it happens just a few months later. The reason that's important is because, one, divorce undermines a child's ability to understand the relationship between men and women. Because what you're saying is, Mommy and Daddy are together, we're married, we're a couple, we're a family, together with you. You are, the most important thing in our lives. Suddenly the family's broken up, suddenly it's destroyed. And their understanding of family is undermined with that. And so in this case, not only was it undermined by the divorce, at a crucial time, 7 years old is a very important, the first 8 years of a child's life are the most important developmentally. So for this to happen to him at the age of 7 was a big deal. It's also a big deal because he trusted that his mother was telling him the truth. She lied to him. She said that's never going to happen, and then it did not long after. So he can't trust his mother. That's undermining his trust in at least one of his parents, and it just happens to be the female parent, the mother. So it goes over his last memory of his parents being together. Then after his birthday, he found out they were getting a divorce, and he was going to stay with his father on the weekends. So,
even remotely, of course, trying to suggest that divorce causes mass murder, because there are hundreds of millions of children of divorce around the world, and very few of them will ever become mass murderers. But we're looking at...
Again, the reason why Stefan keeps saying this isn't causal is because it is a number of factors. You know, it's like if somebody... It's like bullying, right? This would be like if a kid was bullied all through school and then decided to come in and perform a school shooting. God forbid, right? But you wouldn't say that it was the one time when kids threw paper airplanes at him, or it was the one time that this kid pushed him into a locker. It was all the times. It was all the times building up to it. That's what Stefan is saying, and Joel represents this as some weird thing, like, oh, what, you think it's a number of factors building up to it? Yes, of course it is. It's stupid to think otherwise.
The number of straws on the camel's back.
Most of the video is spent going through Elliot Rodger's manifesto and finding various things in his life that probably, at least according to Steph, contributed to his murdering people. Not claiming that any one of these were the proximate cause of the murder.
It contributed to his worldview. It contributed to him becoming who he was. Excuse me. Yes. Yeah, I mean, you're saying his worldview and his politics were crucial to this. Stefan's saying the things that he went through, his life experiences, which informed his worldview, which comprised his worldview, were causal, were important. Like, this is a stupid thing to take issue with, in my opinion.
Murders, but that all of them contributed in some way. And there are a legitimately shocking number of these reasons. Video games, his parents divorcing, his first experience with masturbation.
Okay, so this is another one I was going to read. I should have waited, I guess. One time while I was alone at a video arcade, I saw an older teenager watching pornography. I didn't know anything about sex at the time. To see this video really traumatized me. I had no idea what I was seeing. I couldn't imagine human beings doing such things with each other. The sight was shocking, traumatizing, and arousing. All of these feelings mixed together took a great toll on me. I walked home and cried by myself for a bit. I felt too guilty about what I saw to talk to my parents about it. I was quite shaken for a few days. This was among the very first glimpses I had of sex. Finding out about sex is one of the things that truly destroyed my entire life. Now, understand, I've heard this. I remember reading a little bit about Elliot Rodgers. He talks about things that destroyed his entire life. Obviously, this is an over-dramatization, but he's just saying this really impacted me. Take special note when you read anything of Elliot Rodgers that said this destroyed my entire life. He's talking about things that contributed to the deep depression he fell into. Sex, the very word fills me with hate. Ironic because, of course, this whole manifesto is about him trying to get sex, but he says, sex, the very word fills me with hate. Once I hit puberty, I would always want it, like any other boy. I would always hunger for it, but I would always covet it. I would always fantasize about it. It almost sounds like Golem from Lord of the Rings, doesn't it? My precious. But that's really how this becomes. A reclusive guy. He has this. He feels like there's this taboo around sex. He has his maladaptive behaviors. He covets it, but he hates it. It really is a weird thing. And yeah, of course, this contributed to him being who he was. You can kind of see that. I don't really get why people are shocked that Stefan Molyneux would say this. Of course. Anyway, not getting any sex is what will shape the very foundation of my miserable youth. This was a very dark day. I want to point out too, our generation, my generation, Joel's generation, was the first generation to grow up on internet pornography. And look, I can't say that is the cause for all of the weird sexual degeneracy that we see today, but the furry community is comprised primarily of millennials. It's mostly people our age. People of our age developed weird sexual fantasies that really didn't exist before that. And it is people that were, if you talk to Gen X people, most of them didn't see nudity, really, even softcore pornography, until they were in their teens. Most people our age saw it at the age of 10, sometimes earlier, many of us, 8 or 9. Zoomers are in the same boat, and it's only escalating. So, is that just coincidence? Maybe, but what is the long-term effect of exposing children to hardcore sexuality at a young age? Well, this is a common tactic for pedophiles to subject children to pornography, to distort their view of what's acceptable. So if they're using it as a tactic and we're applying this on a massive scale, is it possible this maybe affects certain people, maybe some people more than others? Maybe some people who have already maladaptive tendencies in a specific way. You think maybe that's a possibility? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just full of garbage. Maybe I'm just stupid, Joel.
His going to different schools, violent movies, his father being too ambitious, and the list goes on.
He's talking about his father moving around a lot, which does, I'll get into that in a bit.
And on. Now, all this does make for a strikingly repetitive and monotonous video, just reading a few lines of the manifesto and blandly adding another straw to the camel's back ad nauseum.
I then started to notice that all the cool kids were interested in skateboarding.
It's called analysis.
I had never even ridden on a skateboard before, but if I wanted to be cool, I had to become a skateboarder. This was the start of an obsession to copy everything that the supposed cool kids were doing. This cool element is an absolutely leprous cancer.
Now, I'm going to disagree with Molyneux on this, and I'm not really agreeing with Joel because I don't think this is his position. Joel is a leftist. He doesn't believe in hierarchy. I don't have to assume that. I know that. He's an egalitarian. Now, I'm not. I'm more right-wing. I'm very right-wing, actually, at this point. I mean, Joel would consider me like a... I'm not going to say it because I don't want to get this video to get flagged, but, it's just... Hierarchy is a thing. It's a natural state of being of man. You're not going to be able to just erase hierarchy, and that's what coolness is. This idea of coolness is dictated by people, by who's where on the social hierarchy. And I think everyone's pretty much had the same experience in school, where there are the cool kids, there is the cool crowd, and they do have this elevated social status. But there's also other niches of other cliques, right? They have the goths, you have the skater kids, whatever cliques you had in your high school. I'm sure that you can remember them, right? And they all took pride in that. And that, I find, is very reflective of the old caste system that you find in like these traditional societies. If you read about the old traditional civilizations, you had the farmer caste, the scholars, the priests, etc. These people, the Masons. These people had different positions on the hierarchy, but they were all proud of their caste. They were all proud of where they came from. The skater kids, maybe they were outcasts, maybe they were not as cool as the preps, but they were proud of who they were. They were proud of their identity. The problem with Elliot Rodger was that he was insecure about where he was in the hierarchy. He didn't take pride in it. He hated it. He aspired to be further up on the hierarchy because he thought that's how he was going to get laid, that's how he was going to be happy, and it infuriated him that he couldn't climb the hierarchy. The problem is not coolness. The problem is insecurity. Anyway, that's my little rant.
In the heart of society and was responsible for massive amounts of bullying and suicidality and rage and violence. Cool is not virtuous.
But it's not hard to see why the video is this way. If you're only looking for the path that leads Elliot Rodger to becoming Elliot Rodger, and if you want to avoid...
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
A systemic critique as much as possible, it only makes sense to go scattershot.
First of all, it's not scattershot to analyze the things in his life that he himself alludes to, and Elliot Rodger in many of these passages says, this impacted me, this traumatized me, this was a very dark day, this laid the foundation for my miserable youth. He is Elliot Rodger himself is ascribing causal properties to these things. Molyneux isn't pulling it out of his ass, Joel. You know what I mean? And it's not that he's even avoiding a systemic critique. He's making a systemic critique. The system is the problem. The system that encourages young men to become alienated and adapt these antisocial qualities and maladaptive coping mechanisms, that's a system. Look at the divorce rates over the last 100 years. If you want, I'm not going to get into that, but you can, even like milquetoast figures like Thomas Sowell talk about why divorce rates have gone up, why there's so many single mothers now, why so many kids are coming from broken homes. You can look at the correlation between young men who come from one-parent households and their likelihood to end up in juvie or prison at one time in their life. I've read numbers of it's like 20 times more likely that a kid that comes from a boy that comes from a one-parent household will end up in juvie or prison at one time in their life than a kid that comes from a two-parent household. Is that not causal? Is that not relevant? Is that just scattershot to mention that? No, of course it's relevant. Come on.
To explore every possible avenue of meaning to figure out what exactly went wrong here. And although that seems kind of reasonable, we can see how this line of reasoning might lead us into a bit of an ethical trap. Specifically, the inability to figure out which actions we want to judge. See, even as we want to prevent mass murderers from coming into existence, this desire can't meaningfully permeate all of the things we do in our day-to-day lives.
This is a straw man he's about to set up where he's going to blame everyone who didn't stop Elliot Rodger. I just want to prep you for that.
For instance, did every woman who chose not to have sex with Elliot Rodger contribute to his decision to murder people?
This is analogous. This is analogous to saying that if I took an 8-year-old child and put him in a room, in a dark closet, for a year. This has been tried before, by the way. If you take a small child that's developing, I think 8 years old probably be too late, but you take a small child, put them in a dark room, never expose them to light, they will be blind for the rest of their life. Their eyes just don't develop. So if someone does that, are you saying that every single person in the world that didn't open the closet door, that didn't intervene, is responsible? No, no one's saying that. No, your analogy is stupid.
I mean, come on. I'm not saying I know that's related to why he committed his crimes, but it might be another straw on the camel's back,
no,
right?
No.
Well, no. That's repulsive. I felt gross just saying it, and I wouldn't have said it, except it comes up later. We can't allow our fear of potential Elliot Rodgers to hold us hostage.
Oh, I love this. Our fear. You know what? The problem is, Joel, that fear is becoming more real for more people. And maybe that doesn't concern you, but there are schools being built with strategically placed walls for cover because people anticipate school shootings. I have relatives in the United States whose children have been in schools, not schools that were shot up, but schools very close to other schools that were shot up. People died. Kids were traumatized. And we don't know what the effect of growing up in a nation where that fear is real each and every day a child goes to school, what that's going to be. How are those kids going to grow up? What's it going to be like? Is it going to desensitize them to violence? Is it going to desensitize them to certain anxieties? Or is it going to make them more anxious? Are they going to become more anxious? More dysfunctional? I don't know. We don't know yet. But bomb detectors, metal detectors, security guards being placed all over schools across America, all over the West. You think, we shouldn't let fear rule us. Okay, shut up, Joel. You don't know what you're talking about.
Make us arrange our lives and our societies in ways that we know to be unacceptable. And at the very least, tiny risk that
and what are you talking about? We shouldn't arrange our societies in what? In terms of hierarchy? Too late, idiot. Every society is. Your egalitarian dream is just that. It's a dream. You're never going to get full equality. You're never going to get everyone just, we're just free. If you want to look into equality, I've just finished reading Revolt Against the Modern World by Julius Evola. He has a great passage. It's after the chapter on the civilization of the mother, where he talks about how, actually I think it is in the civilization of the mother, where he talks about the fact that you have this Amazonian spirit. When women take power, that egalitarianism and sexual promiscuity become rampant, and men are reduced to the base functions that they serve to women. And, that's a very pertinent point to make. It's very relevant to today's society, and it actually summarizes a lot of the points, not just of Elliot Rodger, but of the greater incel community. That's like, your ideology leads to this. Your ideology leads to men being disenfranchised, and these men see themselves as disenfranchised, and your answer to that is to say, well, the ideologies that arise from this, the perspectives that arise from this, which you label white supremacy and misogyny, they're the problem, not the root cause, not the factors that contributed to these people existing the way they do. I mean, it's just, you are so far off the mark, you are so out of line with your analysis of this. It is baffling. It's baffling. I'm glad I'm not a leftist anymore. I used to be a liberal, but looking at people like this, it sickens me.
Unhappy virgin will start killing people will always be too small and too unimportant to trump our fundamental desire to use our bodies the way we want to. So, looking at the life and manifesto of Elliot Rodger, we can't just point to every event that happened to him and say, don't do that, 'cause just look what happened. It's
not every single one, it's the ones that correlate with a profile of a mass murderer.
Far too narrow. Instead, we can only judge and advise against those actions that are themselves harmful, that do or transparently lead to obvious damage. But here's the thing. Stefan Molyneux actually sidesteps this problem, and he does so by implicitly claiming one of the strangest things imaginable. What if basically everything that ever happened to Elliot Rodger was bad? What if all of his experiences deserve judgment because they are all harmful or maladaptive or wrong, particularly those things related to his upbringing? Like, look at how Stefan talks about Elliot's first experience going to school.
So Elliot goes on to say, I was forced to wear a uniform, which I hated because I had to wear uncomfortable socks up to my knees. I was very nervous and cried on my first day there. I didn't like school at Dorset House very much.
Now, reading this part of the manifesto, I might say, sure, that's hard. And when I was a kid, I cried the first time I went to school and wanted to see my mom again. But that's normal, right? The difficulty of growing up. But to Stefan, no.
Look at him, he's like a child. He emotes like a child, shaking his head like a fucking kindergartner. Let's go back a little bit. I want to read that.
Harmful or maladaptive, implicitly claiming one of the against those actions that are themselves harmful, that do or transparently lead to obvious damage. But here's the thing. Stefan Molyneux actually sidesteps this problem, and he does so by implicitly claiming one of the strangest things imaginable. What if basically everything that ever happened to Elliot Rodger was going to school?
So Elliot goes on to say,
I went way too far back. I apologize for that. Okay, so this is what I wanted to read. At the time that I was born, my mother and father were living in a house in London, but shortly after my birth, they decided to move to the countryside in Sussex. My father, So I was enrolled in an all boys school. And I cried on my first day. I'm sorry, no, this wasn't.
I was forced to wear a uniform, which I hated.
There is a part
because
relevant to the schooling that I did want to go over.
I was very nervous and cried on my first day there.
Joel kind of brushes it off, but it is important.
Very much.
Now, reading this part of the manifesto, I might say, sure, that's hard. And when I was a kid, I cried the first time I went to school and wanted to see my mom again. But that's normal, right? The difficulty of growing up. But to Stefan, no. You should listen to your child, and to do otherwise is appalling parenting.
Yeah, what he's saying, what Stefan said, I'm sorry, I fucked it up. What Stefan was saying there was, when your child is screaming that they don't want to go to school, you should take that into account. And there isn't an indication that they didn't, but there's no indication that they did. And Joel even admits himself that Stefan goes out of his way to explain that you shouldn't just placate your child's every whim, but you should take it into account. You shouldn't railroad them through everything either. He's just advocating for a middle ground, essentially. It's a milquetoast opinion, should be common knowledge, isn't for a lot of people. I've seen a lot of parents do just that. I don't know if that was really a contributing factor. It's not a great way of parenting, in my opinion. But I don't really agree with Stefan. But I think Joel is. Look at that creepy face. Look at that. Look at that face.
So this is important. There's a certain ethic or approach to parenting, which goes along the lines of, well, I know what's best for you, and therefore I don't have to listen to what you don't like. I consider this appalling parenting. Appalling parenting. You listen to the child. If the child is crying and doesn't want to go away to school, then that is something you need to take into account. Doesn't mean you have to indulge your child's every whim. It's not sort of one extreme to the other, but these are important things to listen to with regards to your children.
And sure, he goes out of his way to say that he's not claiming we should indulge our child's every whim, but it's hard to see another takeaway from his position here. I mean, all Elliot wrote was that he had to go to a school he didn't like. The reactions of his parents to this information aren't even mentioned. So, what did these people do wrong? Not be compassionate enough? Not take their kids out of this school? I don't know.
There isn't much information about how this went down in this part, but when you look at what he's about to talk about later on in this video, there does seem to be a pattern of them telling him to do things, pushing him to do things, not giving him any warning, and undermining his predictability in his environment. And that does affect people. It does breed anxiety. So just keep that in mind. That is relevant. It's not as relevant as what he's about to talk about. But it reinforces a pattern. That's all it does.
Stefan doesn't tell us, but it's something, right? They acted poorly in some way. Or later on, Stefan looks at a place in Elliot's manifesto where he discusses masturbating and having sexual fantasies that he didn't talk about with his parents.
In fact, I didn't talk to my parents at all about my sexual development. I felt too guilty and embarrassed about it. Whenever they probed me, I lied to them, telling them that I had no sex drive. My mother once caught me looking at pictures of girls online, and I frantically had to convince her that I stumbled on those pictures by accident.
And of course, when I read this, I'm like, yeah, of course he had those fantasies. Of course he lied about them to his parents. And I'm not saying we should shame sex.
Yeah, no, you're going to get fixated on the fantasy, but the problem was he said he had no libido. He said he had no sex drive, which was a lie. An obvious lie. But I think what Stefan is just saying here is, like, you need to have the birds and the bees talk with your kid early on. Perfectly reasonable. And moreover, this touches on the trust thing. You need to be able to build a relationship of trust with your parents, right? So if you don't talk to them when they're young, and you don't build up that level of trust and openness with them, when you're older, there is going to be more anxiety, more awkwardness with them, and you're not going to want to share anything with them. And this is an embarrassing, difficult thing to talk about, especially with your parents. I wouldn't say that you should talk about his fantasies, but when you're a kid, clearly he did have these maladaptive views of sexuality. He admits that he was traumatized, sexually traumatized. That's it. Elliot Rodgers said that. So to say that maybe if his parents had been more, or if he'd been more open with his parents and they'd been able to talk about it, maybe that could have helped keep him on the straight and narrow, I don't think is too beyond the pale.
Sexual desire among teenagers, but that doesn't mean you have to talk about that stuff with your mom. It can be embarrassing and weird, and I know I acted that way with my mother and continue that wonderful tradition to this very day.
Like,
but to Stefan, this is evidence of some big pattern of isolation.
You can't start talking with your kids when they're 15. You have to have the conversation. I started chatting with my daughter when she was still in her mother's womb, for heaven's sakes. You have to have conversations that go on for years. Before you can talk about the difficult things, you need to talk about the easy things. You can't just jump in the deep end without having that connection with your children.
You have to talk to your kids. Start off early with the easy stuff, so that later on you can get to the somehow desirable point where you're exchanging sexual fantasies with the people who birthed you. Again, this passage of the manifesto somehow works as evidence that there was bad behavior on the part of these parents. And these examples get even more ridiculous and
You catch that bottom part? He doesn't talk about it, but at 16 years old, Roger threatened to commit suicide after hearing about a peer's social life. His father, Somaya, that's his stepmom, and several friends talked with him for 3 hours to cheer him up. Okay, what the fuck? What the fuck? At 16, your friend's talking about his social life, and you threaten to commit suicide. What? Yeah. So, and then this, I should read the top paragraph as well. My sex drive was at its peak at this age. Whenever I got back from school, I had to masturbate. The urge was too strong. During my masturbation sessions, I often built elaborate fantasies in my mind about a hot blonde girlfriend that I had passionate sex with, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he's saying that he lied. So what he's saying here is that it was something he was driven for, but he was still repressing it. So there was this dissonance in his mind. Just reinforcing that pattern, like this is a trend.
How works as evidence that there was bad behavior on the part of these parents. And these examples get even more ridiculous and threadbare somehow. Elliot's mother making him attend camp.
At 11 years old, he writes, I was enjoying a lovely summer, but suddenly my mother said that I had to go to summer camp. I didn't like this one bit. It was a last-minute decision. One moment I was relaxing and enjoying my summer break. The next, my mother is waking me up early to take me to my first day of camp.
Stefan assumes that she did this with no warning. Another example of Elliot's parents not preparing him in the ways that they should have.
And again, we see this. Can't trust, can't relax, is not prepared for things, is not aware of what's coming down the road. Everything is bam, bam, just comes.
Didn't even notice I did that. So, yeah. Just to read this again. It's good to read these things, because he doesn't. And these are important. At 11 years old, I was enjoying a lovely summer, but suddenly, my mother said that I had to go to summer camp. I didn't like this one bit. It was a last-minute decision. One moment, I was relaxing and enjoying my summer break. The next, my mother was waking me up early to take me to my first day at camp. So that, I mean, the way he describes this, it sounds like there was no prep, no warning, but suddenly said that I had to go to summer camp. I didn't like this one bit. It was a last-minute decision. One moment I was relaxing. The other, my mom was waking me up. So again, everything about this statement suggests that he had no warning. Listen to how Joel phrases this.
Out of nowhere.
But for one, there is no textual evidence that their sending him to this camp was this sudden. Sure, he says it was a bit last minute, but he makes it clear that his parents explained their rationale for this decision before the day he had to wake up early. This was a decision she made with my father because they thought it would be healthy.
When does he say that? You just asserted that. I don't know, where does it say that he was given? No, he didn't say that. And just because this was a decision she made with my father because they thought it would be healthy for me. Just because she discussed it with his father does not mean she discussed it with him. Him and his father are two different people, Joel. What are you talking?
For me. What an awful mom.
Both his stepmother and his mother are very attractive women and are cold and cruel.
You know what? I'm going to
stepmother
skip
is, by his report, he doesn't say much about his mother, but his mother did just wake him up out of nowhere and say, "You're going to camp."
But more importantly, Elliot writes about enjoying his time at the camps he went to. In both of the other two sections where he talks about camp, he describes being unhappy at first, but then growing to enjoy it.
It doesn't matter that he came to enjoy it. The point is that she gave him no warning. It's about the predictability. It's about trust. He has no trust. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He doesn't know what's coming down the pipe. That's the point that Molyneux is making. That's the point that you're avoiding. It doesn't matter that he came to enjoy it afterward. That's not relevant.
playing games, watching movies, making friends. And what sets this particular camp experience apart is specifically that he had his first bad experience with a girl.
Right.
So why are we judging these parents for sending their kid to a place that they knew him to enjoy? It's ridiculous on the face of it. His stepmom having some tasteful nudes online.
I'm not going to reproduce the pictures here, but
I'm going to skip.
It's hard to know, but it certainly would fit.
How he assumes that Elliot was disturbed by this, even though he never once talked about it in his tell-all.
Yeah, so his stepmom had some nudes online, which, if it was your mother figure, I know it's not his real mom, but if it was your mother figure or a mother figure of yours that had nudes online, that would be a little bit weird, wouldn't it? I don't agree with Stefan, but it is a little bit weird.
All manifesto about his sexual anxiety. Who cares about any of that? Stefan has decreed that it's bad to have artsy nudes and stepchildren at the same time. So let's pop another straw on that back. And I could give you more examples of this. I promise I could, but I think you see the point. And honestly, looking at Stefan's gesture here, his desire to explain the nightmare of Elliot Rodger with a series of moral failings, I do feel some sympathy. I mean, who doesn't feel the temptation to solve this puzzle, to find a solution and understand step by step how this event occurred and how we might prevent it from occurring again? But the cost is too high and too absurd to treat.
What? What cost? What fucking cost? What is the cost for trying to prevent mass shootings, Joel?
Every mundane and normal event as something worthy of our condemnation. To locate evil in every moment of Elliot's life is to...
It's not about Elliot Rodger. It's more about the society we live in that produces people like Elliot Rodger. He's not an isolated incident. As you yourself have pointed out, there's a whole community, potentially of millions of people online, the incel community, which share his beliefs. So it's not about him. It's about the system. The system. Yes, it's about the system.
Pathologize life itself, to render all of our actions disgusting and immoral. That is the only way to explain this tragedy. And even if we took this raw deal, accepted that all of the events in Elliot Rodger's life, even the seemingly average ones, were secretly terrible and harmful, is this a meaningful explanation of his crimes? Have we...
What?
Gotten our answers here that we want so badly? I don't think so. To me, it just obfuscates any sense of agency that Elliot Rodger had in all of...
No, it doesn't. Actually, I don't even understand how does this remove responsibility. He talks about responsibility quite a bit in this and in the ended portion of this video. I'm just going to let you see it, but no, that's stupid.
Of this. See, the thing about a camel and the straw that breaks its back is that the output of the situation is a necessary function of the input. Camels can only bear so much weight, and if you keep adding more and more straws, that camel's eventually gonna pop. And while that might be unfortunate, it is predictable, a natural property of straws and camels' backs. Can we say the same thing about Elliot Rodger? Were his murders the natural output of his love of World of Warcraft, his father's ambition, his parents not preparing him for camp, his stepmom having some crunchy nudes on the internet? Do these events even count as straws?
First of all, you're mischaracterizing and minimizing them, and you're not attempting to analyze them in any way or shape or form. He's trying to make this into a philosophical thing about determinism. First of all, fuck off 10 years back to when this might have been relevant. Secondly, I don't know, maybe even further, but I remember the determinist argument back then. This is just dumb. And frankly, it's a conservative argument to say, oh, it's just about personal responsibility. I've actually heard this a lot. People bring this up during these mass shooting things. They say like, the problem is personal responsibility. These kids are they're pampered and entitled. No, no, no. People are, to a degree, a product of their environment. You can look at input and see output. You can look at, the welfare state and how it was created and the social programs that brought it about. It wasn't just personal responsibility, was it? I mean, you can blame the people. You can blame the people that decided to participate, but ultimately, there was a causal. There was some input there, wasn't there? I mean, this is just stupid and pedantic, and your attempt to bring up personal responsibility, like as if Elliot Rodger didn't suffer. You know what I mean? The whole thing is about Elliot Rodger's suffering. This whole video is about Elliot Rodger's suffering and how he explains it, and the fact that in the end, he fucking shot himself. So that was his justice, delivered by his own hand. So what is this garbage about personal responsibility? This has no relevance to anything, man. Come on.
Well, in one sense, maybe. I mean, who knows if we have free will? Who knows what those words even mean? And perhaps Elliot was just a function of his experiences, bound to murder those people in the same way that I'm bound to make this video. But, come on, we can't live like this. We must be able to be decent, to live moral lives. And no matter what Elliot experienced, good or bad, we must be able to look at his crimes and say, that was wrong. You had no good reason for doing that.
First of all, most people do think it's wrong to kill these people, but there's also a lot of vengeful fucking people. People that feel like the universe dealt them a shitty hand. There are a lot of, what Edward Dutton would call spiteful mutants. These people that really shouldn't have been born, that under certain natural selective environments wouldn't have been born, but were born nonetheless and have these sort of maladaptive properties. People that have sort of Elliot Rodger-esque coping skills, that have social anxieties. Maybe they have a touch of autism. Maybe they're mentally ill. People that can't function in our society. Those people, a lot of them are angry. They're angry, and with somewhat good reason. Modernity, egalitarianism, this new postmodern society that we've created has disenfranchised a lot of men. It has condemned a lot of men to a life of misery. In Japan, I think it's something like 30% of the millennials are virgins. Like, it's insane. It's fucking insane. We have a society where the institution of marriage has been undermined and sexual promiscuity is rampant, and yet there are so many men that can't they can't have prospects of this, right? That is a problem. That's an issue that you have to address, and you can't address Elliot Rodger without addressing that issue, which you don't want to do. It's not a moral question. It's a question of how the fuck do we stop this? That is a functional question. Morality it's not up for debate. Nobody's debating. Like, if you want to debate an incel on whether or not what Elliot Rodger did was good and moral, that is not a debate worth having with most decent people. You don't need to convince anyone of that.
And it wasn't the straws that did it. It was you.
Yeah,
and
good
look,
for you.
I'm not saying that there is no use for Stefan's form of investigation. While I do think Stefan Molyneux is a pseudoscientific quack with mommy issues who's totally incapable of producing anything of meaning, this
I would say that's all of you. You just described. I don't know about the mommy issues thing, but dude, you're the one that reviews children's movies. Like, what the fuck, the Trolls movie, and there's like some kids movie with sharks. Like, you don't even review grown-up adult movies that are meant for, intelligent people. You're reviewing movies for children. That's what you do, and you're wildly successful. I admit, you got like almost 200,000 subs. Good for you, man. But come on, pseudo-intellectual. You do a mixture of reviews for movies for children and pseudo-political stuff. You white knighted for Anita Sarkeesian against Sargon of Akkad in a video I could only stand about 5 minutes of. I just don't like. I don't like Stefan that much. I'm not really a big fan of Stefan Molyneux, even now. Especially not this time. I fucking hated him at one point. But You know, the defooing stuff was totally immoral, in my opinion. But this, like, come on, dude.
Sort of highly specific psychological perspective can be interesting and telling, but such an analysis can't be the end to this story. And any attempt we make to draw some elaborate causal map of Elliot Rodgers' life, to understand why he did what he did in some perfectly determined way, will never be successful or adequate. At the end of the day, Elliot Rodger may have been the victim of something. If not his parents or the world around him, then of the machinations of his own mind. But we don't need to feel pity for him.
Machinations. Ooh, you used a big word. I think it's pronounced machinations. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But really, like, he's a victim of his own thoughts, is what he just said. Maybe he's a victim of his own thoughts. Where did the thoughts come from, Joel? What sparked the thoughts? That's the big brain question I want to ask. Oh, God.
Him, or to try to explain his actions with a million meaningless straws, because he was a monster and he is dead, and nothing.
That was supposed to be profound. He's a monster and he's dead. That's very biblical. That would sound very religious, Joel. He's a monster and he's dead. Well, thank God. I guess we don't have to worry about the next one then. Do we?
Nothing remains of him. That is, except for one thing, his beliefs, his politics.
Oh, there it is.
Art.
There it is. There it is. His beliefs, his politics, that's causal. You haven't made any fucking point to prove that. You haven't substantiated that at all. This video has included far more evidence to the contrary. And yet you just assert it. The rest of this video, I don't even think I want to play the rest of it. I do. I want you to see it. This video is going to be long as shit, and I'm sorry, but you know, I'll break it up a little bit. Maybe I'll break it up and release it in parts or something. I don't know, man. But this gets really fucking pathetic.
And don't kid yourself. Elliot Rodgers' art is vital. I don't think we have to argue against him like he's espousing some coherent political ideology. I'd actually recommend not doing that. But we should recognize that we can see his ideas reflected back at us in a million places. Most obviously, we have the incel community. Even during Elliot Rodgers' life, this community started gaining traction on forums like PUA Hate. But it's only grown since then. And these guys idolize Elliot Rodger, fundamentally think he made a lot of good points.
What is again, you haven't drawn the connection between his ideology and the shooting. Like, this is like saying anyone who thinks that Ted Kaczynski made good points is also, you know, a potential murderer. And, you know, maybe there's some people that are, you know, dangerous that are going to read the Unabomber's manifesto and go out and do the same thing he did. But there are millions and millions more people, very highly intelligent, sophisticated people that read Ted Kaczynski's manifesto and thought, man, this guy makes some really good points. And they didn't do anything horrible. They didn't go out and kill people. So again, your implication's wrong. It's stupid. Okay? Ted Kaczynski had many great points. And you know what? I personally think that Elliot Rodger even had a couple of decent points. I don't think he was particularly thought-provoking, and I think that he was very misguided, and I have a lot of pity for him. But this idea, like, you're trying to draw lines that you can't draw, and so you just like leave it hanging. Oh, ideology and politics, ideology and politics. If I just keep asserting this, eventually people will believe it.
Seem to share Elliot's political cognitive dissonance concerning women, as they simultaneously recognize them of people depriving them of the greatest pleasure known to man, sex and love, and as robotic and opportunistic subhumans, femoids. What's more, we can see Elliot's work in the actions of these guys. Since Elliot Rodgers' manifesto and massacre, there have been 4 more mass murderers who literally cited him as an inspiration, a body count of 42 more people.
Yes, this is true. Copycats do happen, yeah. But again, like, was it his ideology? Is it the fact that these guys identified with him? The incel rebellion has begun. Again, like, you know, you can say that his worldview provoked this, but it's the fact that he identified a lot of the problems that millions of guys are going through, and then he went out and killed a bunch of people. So naturally, you're going to have at least a few people that read his manifesto, that identify with him, that feel like this guy went through what I'm going through, and now I'm going to do what he did, to follow in his footsteps, to emulate the supreme gentleman. Yeah, but again, you're trying to relate this to his politics and mischaracterizing his politics.
People. And we don't even have to go to incels to see Elliot Rodgers' ideology in our culture.
Oh, here it comes.
No, we can just look at the guy who's talking to us, Stefan Molyneux. Like Elliot, Stefan is a white supremacist.
First of all, I've always been skeptical of the ideas.
White supremacist. You notice these parentheses? That's not that's not drawing attention to a white person. Rightwingwatch.org. Jared Holtz. Isn't that Jared Holtz thing? Yeah, okay, fuck you. Fuck you. Right Wing Watch. Suck my dick, honestly. Yeah, so... yeah, just listen
of white nationalism, of identitarianism, and white identity. However, I am an empiricist, and I could not help but notice that I could have peaceful, free, easy, civilized, and safe discussions in what is essentially an all-white country.
Like Elliot, he thinks that women are often
So that makes him a white supremacist. I mean, he even says he doesn't like the ideas of white nationalism. He started the video with that. But then he says, in white countries, I can have civilized, safe, open discussions. Yeah, that's because we have laws to protect your freedom of expression. Or at least we did. We don't anymore. Those are being eroded. I mean, in America, you can say you kind of still do. But you can look at that guy, I forget his name, guy who put up Identity Europa flyers around his town or his college, wherever that was in Maryland. And they did a 6-month investigation into it, took fingerprints off the flyers. And then when they finally caught him, released his information, doxed the fucking guy, they held a press conference where they announced he actually didn't violate any laws, but they got him on some bullshit town code violation for littering. So they conducted a 6-month investigation and pulled fingerprints off a flyer to arrest a guy for littering. Of course, it was a political thing, but this is the problem. We, European nations, do have like a history of openness and liberty. And yeah, like the Magna Carta is a European thing. You know what I mean? Like that's not a white nationalist position. That's a common sense position. You go to Africa, go to literally any part of Africa and try to make some big stand of free speech. Try violating their social taboos. You will be beaten to death in the streets. You idiot.
Incapable of choosing their partners properly. He thinks that because of the modern dysfunctional structure of society, they're now incentivized to choose the poor, aggressive men instead of the richer, nicer, kinder ones.
And it really wasn't until the free market that nice guys got the edge. And then nice guys were getting the edge, competent guys were getting the edge, decent guys were getting the edge. And then the assholes said, okay, well, let's just swarm to the state, get a welfare state, and now we're back on top. Now women can go for jerks and aggressive people and so on. Because the guy who's really good at getting resources in a primitive society usually ends up, broke, poor, or in jail in a free society.
And
Yes, okay, do I have to explain this to you? I don't even want to explain it. It's so obvious why this is true. Men who are strong, who have low impulse control, physically strong, who have low impulse control and low intelligence, they will be more dominant in a more chaotic environment, because high IQ people tend to have a lot of anxiety, especially about the future. They start to worry, like, if I have a bunch of kids, I'm going to have to take care of them, I'm going to have to feed them, I'm going to have to protect them. Low IQ people don't worry about that. They just spray their seed wherever, right? Low IQ populations do that. And so in a society that demands high intelligence, that fosters safe communities, it's the people with high intelligence that are going to have more kids. It's those people are going to have more resources. But once you have a welfare state, once these guys once the strong, physically, maybe aesthetically attractive men who, are lower status, lower intelligence, but have higher levels of testosterone, maybe lower impulse control, when those guys are allowed to survive or even thrive, they appeal more to the evolutionary psychology of the female brain, where, women have this tendency to be attracted to the strong men, the physically strong men, because the physically strong man is the man that has traditionally survived in tribal primitive societies. And so it has been ingrained in women, that is the type of man that you should be looking for. That is a virile man. And men are subjected to the same sort of evolutionary influences, right? We have the same thing. But if you're talking about women and how women select men, it is important to recognize this. That's not sexist. That's not misogynist. You don't have to hate women because of it. You do have to recognize it, though.
Like Elliot, he thinks that women have to be held accountable in some way.
All the cold-hearted jerks who run the world came out of the vaginas of women who married assholes.
Yeah, this is a deleted
And
video.
I don't know how to make the world a better place
for a
without
reason.
holding women accountable for choosing assholes.
Right.
Your dad
It's men's
was an
responsibility
asshole because
to hold
your
women
mother
accountable.
chose him. Because it works on so many women.
Now, I'm not saying that Stefan is pro-mass murder or something like that, but his political connection with Elliot Rodger is undeniable.
I'm denying
He
it.
fundamentally...
I'm denying it. You're a fucking idiot. Nothing you've said has been coherent or accurate. No. Stefan Molyneux is not anything like Elliot Rodger ideologically. Not then, not now. No.
agrees with him on a wide variety of topics. In fact, their similarity is probably the reason why Stefan didn't want to talk about this stuff in the first place. After all, he feels no compunction politicizing these murders when he can somehow paint Elliot's crime as an example of racism against white people.
But his hatred was for blonde white girls. And that is as much a racial crime as it is a gender crime. The gender is the result of him being heterosexual and rejected by women, but the racial element is very specific. And if you can imagine, if a half white guy had targeted only black women, then this would be a racial hate crime.
Or when he claims that...
Okay, why is that ridiculous, though? Because he's saying blonde white girls. He specifically said blonde white girls. That's who he was attracted to. A blonde white girl is who he fantasized about when he was younger. He said that. So why is it ridiculous for Stefan to say, hey, this is a racial thing, because yes, he committed a crime against a white girl, but he was targeting against the girl, but he was also targeting white women specifically. If he was targeting any other race of women specifically, that would be considered a racial crime. That's not to say that the culture is racist against white people. I could provide a mountain of evidence to support that theory if you'd like, but that's not necessarily what he's saying. He's saying if we would apply that standard were it any other race of women that he was targeting and call that racist, we should call this racist too. Come on.
leftist politics were another straw on his back.
Leftism, egalitarianism, liberalism, socialism, communism, all of the evening out ideologies may perhaps play a role, a small role to be fair,
A large role.
in this idea that violence is perfectly acceptable in redistributing the goods of this world.
But when it comes to this being a crime...
No, it's not. That's not entirely accurate. What Stefan said there was not completely true. It's not. It is partly about redistributing wealth. It's about, the idea of egalitarianism, especially under far leftists, is equality of outcome. And so, if the outcome of your life is misery and unhappiness and dysfunction, and you see other people who are not getting the same thing, you're like, well, this is bullshit. These ideas don't pan out. They don't work in the real world. I'm not benefiting from this in any way. This isn't egalitarianism. This is equality in all the worst ways, but when it comes to the erasure of hierarchy, it's just not happening. So Elliot Rodger adapted to that and said, you know what, I'm going to embrace the hierarchy and try to climb it. And then he failed. And then he got frustrated because he didn't know how he failed, how to correct course. That's the problem.
Of misogyny and white supremacy actually being reflective of ideologies that real people have and disseminate to their massive audiences? Nope, let's avoid politics there. And everything Elliot Rodger represents and writes about just spraying forth out of the ether, the random garblings of a madman with family problems, impossible to connect to anything in the real world. Just forget about
Literally all Stefan did was connect what Elliot Rodger said and did to the real world.
that stuff. It's irrelevant, distasteful. So, Stefan Molyneux looks at this picture by Elliot Rodger, My Twisted World, and he tries to explain the picture with a series of esoteric facts. Elliot Rodger's disgusting beliefs and actions can be understood just by looking at his life, at his parents forcing him to do things, at World of Warcraft and violent video games.
At the undermining of predictability and the anxiety that probably ensued from not being given any warning about the direction of his life, being pushed and pulled in every direction, which I think is how Stefan saw this, whether it's true or not. Video games being the maladaptive practice of escapism to get away from from his life instead of facing the hardships. Yeah, that might be a part of it.
Games at stepmoms and their butts. And
or maybe being sexualized at a young age, or being exposed to hardcore sexuality at a young age. That might have played a role.
Understand why anyone might want to do this. Because once we have all this supposed information, the picture and its meanings can be determined, fixed down. This work doesn't mean what you think it means. Honestly, it doesn't mean much of anything. The manifesto is just the result of a bunch of tiny failures that added up. And that's all there is to it.
Added up to what?
But it's not these little moral tidbits that we see when we look at Elliot Rodger. It's not some collection of esoteric historical trivia. No, what we see is something meaningful. A person, his crimes, his ideology, his art. So, what does all that say to you?
It says you're a fucking creep who needs to comb his hair, and I don't know. Just fucking stop talking about politics. Go back to your gay cape shit, okay? Go back to your shitty children's movies. Go review Shrek and shut the fuck up. Now, I wasn't gonna read the comments that he had pinned, but you know what? This video is long as shit already. Might as well. I'm gonna break this up anyway, so might as well read through this. The things I respond to, blah, blah, blah. Is it reasonable to interpret Elliot Rodger's crime as a hate crime against white people? It's hard to even argue against a position this is ridiculous. Elliot Rodger did resent white people, but he resented them from the perspective of a white supremacist who looked down on non-white people. He specifically resented white women for going with black men and not him. This was a crime transparently motivated by white supremacy. Okay, but the problem is there... It doesn't matter why. If you resent, like, if I say I resent, I haven't actually read this comment. If I said like I hate black people because this. It doesn't really matter why I say that. Like the thing still stands that you hate that person. Like, if I were to say that, which I would never. I wouldn't. But this is just. And that's not being facetious. I really wouldn't. Like, I don't want to go into anything doxy, but I probably have more ethnic acquaintances than Joel. I'm willing to bet that. Okay. Well, I don't think it was a hate crime against white people, but what he's saying is that there was an ethnic element to it, and that he was targeting white women. So your attempts to make this about white supremacy are rather disingenuous. Is it reasonable to interpret Elliot Rodger as a leftist who took redistribution of resources to mean redistribution of women? Well, no, it's sort of more than that. It's more about the concept of equality of outcome, I think. But no, where's Stefan even getting that from? For one thing, Elliot didn't want to redistribute women. He wanted to murder them and erase them from society. No, he actually wanted a woman. That's initially why. What are you this stupid? But more importantly, Eliot never conveyed any allegiance with leftism in his writings. He doesn't need to. I don't think he was a leftist, by the way. I think he was probably more right-wing in his thought, but he was affected by leftist ideology. He was a product of a world that embraced leftist ideology. Nor would it make sense for him to have done that. Incels reject feminism. Okay, but feminism isn't analogous with leftism. At least in my experience, tend to lean toward the right, whereas leftists want to redistribute resources because they see the lives of the poor as meaningful and worthy of protection. Why are people poor? I mean, if it's all about personal responsibility, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Stop asking for handouts. Come on. I mean, you said it yourself. Personal responsibility, right? Elliot Rodger considered women subhuman. Again, you're stupid for saying that. That doesn't make any sense at all. If they were subhuman, we couldn't breed with them, right? Like, a subhuman is something other than human. How do you, like, that is a biological term that you are so egregiously misusing. Anyway, this video has been long enough. Thank you for sitting with me through this torture if you made it to the end of it. I will be absolutely amazed. Thank you and good night.